Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Yesterday, there were a number of updates related to the coronavirus outbreak in the country, and we'll quickly update you about them before we move on to our three stories, which today are all related to the outbreak. The number of cases in the country yesterday jumped to 173, and India also witnessed its fourth death due to COVID 19. The person was a 70-year-old man from Punjab who had returned from Germany via Italy around 15 days back. He was also diabetic and had cardiac issues. In Tamil Nadu, authorities have identified what they call is a domestic case, a 20-year-old who had no history of foreign travel. To curb the spread of the virus, the government also barred all international commercial passenger flights to land in India from March 22nd for 1 week. Later in the day, Prime Minister Narendra Modi also addressed the nation, urging people to not step out of their homes for a few weeks, and also announced that there will be a Janata curfew for the whole country on Sunday. He said the curfew will be on from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. on Sunday.
मेरा सभी देशवासियों से ये आग्रह है कि आने वाले कुछ सप्ताह तक जब बहुत जरूरी हो तभी अपने घर से बाहर निकलें। जितना संभव हो सके आप अपना काम चाहे बिजनेस से जुड़ा हो, ऑफिस से जुड़ा हो सके तो अपने घर से ही करें। आज प्रत्येक देशवासी से एक और समर्थन मांग रहा हूं। ये है जनता कर्फ्यू। जनता कर्फ्यू यानी जनता के लिए, जनता द्वारा खुद पर लगाया गया कर्फ्यू। इस रविवार यानी 2 दिन के बाद 22 मार्च रविवार को सुबह 7 बजे से रात 9 बजे तक सभी देशवासियों को जनता कर्फ्यू का पालन करना है। इस जनता कर्फ्यू के दरमियान कोई भी नागरिक घरों से बाहर न निकले, न सड़क पे जाए, न मोहल्ले में या सोसाइटी में इकट्ठे हो, अपने घरों में ही रहे।
He also emphasized the importance of social distancing, asked people to avoid panic buying, and announced that the government has decided to form a COVID-19 economic response task force. Now, as India tries to stop the spread of the coronavirus and manage patients already suffering from it, it is important to note that apart from the measures that central government is taking, it is the measures that the states will take that will be the first line of defense against what is now a full-blown public health emergency. This is because health is a state subject, and how the states are able to respond to the crisis will largely depend on their finances and how they manage it. Though a recent analysis done by the Indian Express reveals that it's not going to be easy. In the first segment, Udit Mishra, who was part of the analysis done by the Express Research Group, joins us to talk about its findings and the glaring gaps the coronavirus outbreak is revealing about the system. So, Udit, you guys did an analysis of the 17 state budgets. What were some of the biggest findings from that analysis?
Right. So before we started off looking at the state budgets, one of the things that we were curious about was to look at not just what these budgets have to say about the coming financial year, because these budgets are about the next financial year, which will start when March gets over, April starts, but also to look at the revised estimates for the current financial year. So at the start of the year, every government says that we are going to earn so much and we are going to spend so much, and so much on health and so much on education. And towards the end of the year, they present the next year's budget, and they also give the revised estimates for that particular year. So it's important to understand that a big chunk of this analysis and big curiosity was also to understand what happened in this current financial year. How did the economy shape up in the states? As many readers who have read the story would know, that states put together are now far more important to India's economy and economic activity than the central budget. So there's a lot of focus on central budget, but actually state budgets together now spend 1.5 times the center's budget. They employ 5 times more people, and they sort of drive economic well-being. So we wanted to know what happened in this particular year, in this financial year. And the key takeaway is this, that in a year when it was expected that governments would help boost growth because all other engines of growth were faltering, we find that even at the state level, state governments have found it difficult to spend money. And a big reason for not being able to spend as much money as they had promised at the start of the year is that they did not eventually get the revenues. They could not raise the revenues or get the revenues that they thought they would get in this financial year. So the big takeaway from the whole analysis is that in a slowing economy, states have struggled to raise enough revenues, and as a result, they've had to cut their expenditures. And as it happens in most expenditure cuts, the cuts typically happen on the capital side, not on the revenue side. The revenue side is the daily committed expenditure like salaries. The capital side is where you make new assets and boost economic activity. So cuts mostly happen on the capital side. And that overall, in totality, that essentially sends a contractionary impulse to the growth momentum in their country. So that's the big takeaway.
What have been the reasons for this fall in revenue?
Right. So states typically get their revenue from, you could break them into two sources. One is what they raise of their own, which is money that they raise from the taxes they employ and the non-tax revenues that they get, and also what they get from the center. Those are called central transfers. Now, what they get from the center is part of the taxes that the center collects. They are shared with the states according to the recommendations of the Finance Commission. And there are all kinds of different grants also that the center gives, either when they run a centrally sponsored scheme, on say health or education, they give certain amount of money, or sometimes grants are given for specific purposes that, you are a hill state and you require a certain amount of help on certain matters related to that. And so you're given that kind of money. Now, what we found is that in this particular year, because the broader economy was slowing down, the money that center could take was less in terms of tax revenues. So the devolution to the states was also lower. And so across the board, you found that in the budget speeches, you found that state chief ministers or finance ministers, whoever was presenting the budget, they repeatedly said that, the center has not given us as much money as we thought we would get in this current financial year. And as a result, we've had to cut back on our expenditures. So that essentially has been, both from GST revenues or from the overall tax divisible pool that should have come to states across the board has not happened. And states have struggled to get that money. And because they didn't have that much money, they've had to resort to expenditure cuts.
So one of the things that we know is that, when we talk about spending on health and talk about public healthcare, it is the states that are responsible. The burden comes on the states. And if we have a scenario where, the revenues are falling, it will directly impact what they can do about public healthcare. Now, considering all this, can you talk about if the revenues are falling, how will this impact our current crisis where we are in a situation where coronavirus cases are rapidly spreading in the country?
Yeah. So, one thing that we found is that, and this is sort of now a long-term trend, is that states typically tend to spend only 5% on an average of their total expenditure on health. Now, that I would suspect that for a country like India, which typically is ranked very lowly in terms of health outcomes, would be a cause of concern. For example, on education, most states spend 15% of their money. So there's a clear prioritization here. States typically spend more on education than on health, almost 3 times more on education. Now, coronavirus kind of situation actually exposes that gap. This is a subject on which states essentially hold all the control. And if they're not spending, if they've not been building up enough capacity, then a coronavirus kind of episode would actually expose those problems. So when we're looking and reading the stuff, it's a matter of concern that are we testing enough people? Do we have enough facilities to test enough people? And those questions keep coming up. And that is essentially a reflection of the fact that we've not traditionally perhaps spent as much on health, and essentially states haven't prioritized spending on health.
Yeah, spending on health is one aspect of it, and having the revenue for it is the other thing. What kind of measures can the government take to sort of, increase their revenue or, manage the system in a better way?
I mean, this is a chicken and egg situation for governments, both center and state. If the economic growth is faltering, then you do not get enough revenues. And if you do not have enough revenues, you do not have enough money to spend and boost economic activity. So how do you get out of it? Because if you do not spend more, then again, that just feeds into a cycle of lower growth. And honestly, there's no easy answer. What states perhaps would have to look at, I mean, this is the point where both center and states in particular, because increasingly they're more important, they'll have to go for more efficient expenditure. They'll have to go for improving the efficiency of whatever they're doing, and also raising their own tax revenues. So maybe a handful of states have said, very few states have said that, they'll be raising their own taxes, their own tax revenues will go up. But it's not very clear how they will do that. For example, Assam this particular year has seen that its revenues from state GST have grown up quite remarkably. So it is the only state of the states that we looked at fair amount of states. It's the only state which saw its revenues go up, but its revenues did not go up because of any other reason, but for the fact that it raised more money through state GST. So for states now, they have to look at their own tax issues and see how much can they raise more from their own kitty and from their own taxes, instead of looking at the center, because center is already struggling. The broader economy is struggling, and maybe in the coming financial year also, if the economic growth continues to struggle a bit, then those revenues may not come through. So states will have to look at raising revenues at their own level through different, excise or on say electricity taxes on electricity, say GST, land revenues, stamp, and all those things.
Next, we talk about the railways. At a time when we are talking about social distancing and avoiding large crowds, we now take a look at the measures the country's largest public transportation system, the railways, is taking during the outbreak. Abhishek Dasdar, who reports on railways for the Indian Express, joins us on a call to talk about it.
Yeah, over the last few days, railways have taken a slew of measures just to keep the virus at bay. One of the things that an initial thing it did was to decide to not distribute its blankets, because they are typically washed once in 2 months, although they are fumigated and all, and then also remove the curtains in the AC compartments. And the whole regime, the whole protocol of cleaning coaches and the compartments, that protocol, things have doubled. So coaches are being cleaned and disinfected, sanitized much more frequently. And stations and all other, possible contact areas for the passengers, mass contact areas, they are being sanitized. And thermal scanners have been pressed into service, that people entering big stations, their body temperatures being measured, etc. And these are some of the things they're doing.
And we also saw today the railways suspending all concessions for passengers, except for a few categories. Could you talk about the reasons why they were done it and what categories will have concessions?
This policy intervention comes in the wake of this larger philosophy that inessential travel by people need to be discouraged. So if you remember, in the last 48 hours, railways suspended operations of around 300 trains to and from, like 155 pairs of trains across the country, which were low on occupancy. That is one. And over the last 48 hours, it has cancelled operation of some 155 pairs of trains which were low on occupancy. And today they have suspended the concessions given out. See, there are some 53 categories of concessions railways gives. Like when you book tickets, you get like senior citizen typically gets a 50% concession. Okay. Students sometimes get like 50% concession, or even journalists, accredited journalists get a 50% concession. Okay, so there are various kinds of categories under which concessions can be availed. So railways decided that except for students and the Divyangs and patients, and various categories of patients also get concession, like cancer patient and this and that. So except for these three categories, all other concessions remain suspended, and they include war widows, they include journalists, and they include farmers, VIPs and delegates, Arjuna awardees, etc., etc. All those concessions stand cancelled All this is to discourage people from traveling to undertake, what they have termed as inessential travel. And this is something Railways is officially saying to people, that please don't travel if you don't have to.
Have we also seen like a dip in numbers of the passengers traveling by the railways in these last 2 weeks?
No. So the cancellation figures, for example, in the normal course, some cancellations do take place, right? So cancellation by passenger, even after booking tickets, people tend to cancel their plans, change, etc. So there has been some 50 to 60% jump apparently in the amount of tickets cancelled in March as compared to last March. That's a huge jump that has been noticed. But then again, for the trains that Railways is cancelling, if people had already booked tickets in them, they're getting the full refund back without any cancellation charges. But if you cancel on your own, like a pre-booked journey, if you cancel on a train which is running and not cancelled yet, for that, some cancellation charges will be cut and you'll get your money back as per the policy.
Also, in the past couple of days, there have been cases where a passenger was traveling by a train and was later tested positive for COVID-19. What kind of coordination have we seen between the railways and the health officials in situations like these when measures are required and contact tracing is required?
Yeah, so Railways is in touch with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare in matters of national disaster of this kind. In the national disaster policy, an outbreak situation is managed by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare as a nodal agency. So Railways is in touch with the Health Ministry, and whatever Health Ministry is prescribing, Railways is implementing. One of the things is that if you come in contact with a suspected COVID patient or an infected person or a person with travel history, etc., or who should be quarantined, you're supposed to detect that person and hand them over to the health officials in the state and be in touch with state health officials, etc. So that is what they are doing. So what happened was that, Railways carry some 2.3 crore passengers every day. Okay. So if people don't declare their own symptoms, it's very difficult to catch somebody like that. But yesterday what happened was that I think 4 people who had come down from Gujarat, at the airport they were screened and that Maharashtra government stamp was put on their hand saying that they had to be in quarantine for 14 days at home. So they took the train and they were on their way to Surat. On the way in Palghar, some passengers and the TT, they saw the stamps and then they were deboarded in Palghar and sent to the government hospital over there. Today, again in Western India, the Saurashtra Express, I think 6 people were spotted like that. They also had stamps on their hands. They were spotted and deboarded. And sometime back, somebody who came back from Italy, somebody from Odisha, he came back from Italy, landed in Delhi, stayed here for a couple of days, took the Rajdhani Express and went to, without informing anyone, he took the Rajdhani Express and went to Odisha where he was tested positive. So these things are coming to light, and as and when they're coming to light, and the system is getting more and more alert to this kind of behavior by people. But the thing is that there is no standard operating procedure for a situation like this. So all agencies are having to think on their feet. So that is what railways are also doing. Mumbai, the local train service in Mumbai is pretty essential. It's the lifeline of the city. So there have been talks whether local train services should be suspended so that people can't crowd, etc. Because local trains in Mumbai are very crowded, etc. So there have been talks. But the view that Railways communicated is that, if you shut down the local trains completely, there may be complete chaos. The other way to do it is that, you shut down the offices or the factories or the schools, etc., so that people don't need to commute. Okay. So that is one of the things. And Railways is advising people to not travel to the extent possible. The decision taken today is in light of that, so that people are discouraged from traveling.
And in the end, we talk about a measure that up until recently the United Kingdom was planning to take against COVID-19, a measure called herd immunity, for which it faced widespread criticism. Conan Sheriff now joins us on a call to talk about what exactly herd immunity involves.
So in the last 2 weeks, we are hearing a lot about herd immunity. This concept propped up after the UK government, the chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, said that UK would adopt the herd immunity strategy to tackle COVID-19. And in the last 2 days, the government has come out and said that not the strategy that we will be adopting, and that we will be adopting the conventional social distancing and self-quarantine strategy that the entire world is right now undertaking to tackle COVID-19. So this is how the herd immunity has come into news, because the UK government said we're going to adopt the herd immunity. Herd immunity is basically used in immunization concepts, vaccination concepts, where you allow a majority of the population to develop immunity, in the sense that majority of population undergoes immunization or vaccination. Thereby, if 2 or 3 infections are introduced in this community, the spread wouldn't happen because you have already built immunity through vaccination. However, there can be cases where patients cannot be immunized, like the elderly, because vaccination is not effective for elderly patients. However, the immunized people act as a barrier and protect the elderly or the vulnerable population.
When there's a scenario where majority people are immunized, the disease will spread a lot more slower, right?
So the immunized people act as barriers and they stop the spread of infection to pass on to the non-immunized population. That is actually the concept of herd immunity. It is very commonly used in polio and measles. Yeah, so this is what herd immunity is.
So right now we're talking about herd immunity in the context where there is a vaccination. Now we know that obviously COVID-19 doesn't have a vaccination as of now. So how is UK planning to use herd immunity in this sense?
Like you pointed out, the UK strategy of herd immunity was assuming that there is no vaccination and let the infection spread to 60% of the population. The second assumption was that this 60% of the population would build immunity through a period of time. That means that they would have antibodies to fight this virus. And through this, we would eventually fight the COVID-19 infection. But like I pointed out, that this was completely based on unknowns and variables. There are various reasons. First, we still don't know the behavior of the pathogen, that is the virus which causes the COVID-19 infection. There is not enough statistically significant data to estimate how many persons get this virus from a single infected person. Because when you talk about herd immunity, these concepts are very important, in the sense how many people does a single person infect. Second, that it takes months or even longer to build immunity against any infection like COVID-19. In December, China was diagnosed with this infection. We still don't know how much of this population has built immunity or has built antibodies for this infection. So that's the second assumption. Even if we assume that a certain amount of population has built immunity, we don't know for how long this immunity would last. There could be a slight mutation in the pathogen, and then the immunity would also then completely disappear.
And I'm guessing, with this strategy that they were going to implement, you would also have a lot of fatalities, right? Because some people will presumably would develop immunity against it or would recover, but then you would have significant people that would not and would suffer because of it.
That was the most significant reason why they retracted this week from this strategy. The Imperial College of London studied the strategy and came up with a number that over 5 lakh people would die if we would undergo the herd immunity process. I'll tell you why this is. So when you allow 60% of the population to get infected, looking at the infection rate and the mortality rate of COVID-19 from China and South Korea and other countries, 20% of that population would require to be admitted in a hospital. When we talk about admission, we're talking about emergency beds and ICU beds. So out of that, we are assuming that 3-4% of them are going to die. So you're going to put a lot of stress on the health infrastructure. So the best strategy is to spread the curve and over a longer period of time, that even if you infect so much of the population, it can be done for a longer period so that each patient gets the proper treatment. The probability of then even the vulnerable population like the elderly or people with comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension can survive. Because if the entire stress is on the emergency services, so the probability for them to get the right treatment in the sense even both quality and quantity becomes very minimal. So that is why even spreading the infection to 65% of population means that there will be so much stress on the healthcare system, especially ICU beds and emergency beds. And we know that the numbers of these two are very, very, you don't have that many number of beds to tackle the COVID-19 virus. So that's the main reason, like you pointed out, that the stress on the healthcare system is why herd immunity for an infection that does not have vaccination or does not have a treatment is completely unviable.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.